Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Hello, so this is the second time we've tried to record this because I got halfway through the news recording and realised I didn't have a microphone on, which is always good.
No. That wasn't the reason, Scott. The reason was I was too enamoured by your fantastic new haircut that we had to restart because I was just too focused on that and not the actual content of the video.
I'm fresh out of military school. I've somehow been cut down. It's a buzz cut style thing. I'm going to war, and you just got to make it work. The console wars are back in full. But anyway, there is some information in regards to how the PS5 might be handling backwards compatibility and emulation. It seems like it's all done through cloud streaming. This was found through a patent that emerged earlier this year, but it was only recently talked about by this user on Twitter called Renker Schedule. Big fan. And so they found out that you would access PS1, PS2, and PS3 games by getting them off like a cloud service, like a cloud hub thing. And so there's some quotes from the patent translated from Japanese that say a large number of game titles across the PS1, PS2, and PS3 and various generations of game consoles can be stored and used via the cloud gaming library. These games can be run on a virtual machine that mimics the operating system associated with each game console. This reminds me of the old Mark Cerny patent that came out, I think it was a good couple of years ago now. Time is a flat circle. But there was a whole conversation around Cerny putting this patent together that would allow you to put discs in the PS5 that would play, old generations of systems, but it was all handled internally. I guess them doing it this way makes it seem more like a monthly service, or you're emulating everything somewhere other than the console. It kind of feels like a good, best of both worlds solution because they don't have to worry about the hardware side, and you could just stream PS1, PS2 games in. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, you are right. I'm almost certain we covered a similar version of this a few years ago as well, especially when it comes to kind of the idea that the new console would mimic the operating system of the old, and that's how we would emulate all of these games. However, the big difference seems to be back then we were very much hoping that you would be able to kind of just pop in a disc, have it play, and enjoy your old games that way, where this very much seems to be kind of putting its feet in the sand is apparently a phrase that I've heard before, and telling us that it's just going to be kind of like digital only. You're going to be able to stream it, you're going to be able to kind of perhaps authenticate your purchase somehow via the console itself, but ultimately you're going to be emulating these games through either streaming or downloading, similar to how you do on kind of Xbox, because even then, for as good as Xbox One's backwards compatibility is, they went into like the guts of the machine and kind of reconfigured it so it could be backwards compatible. A lot of the times you are kind of popping in a game, and that's kind of acting as an authenticator that then downloads the game itself onto your console. So it's kind of playing off the disc, but it's kind of not. Like you said, it's almost the best of both worlds. So I would be up for this version if they can kind of make it a bit malleable and kind of account that for the fact that a lot of the people already own some of these games, especially if you've bought them, for instance, on the PlayStation 4 store, because there are a handful of PlayStation 2 games on there, and then kind of acknowledge that people will want that to kind of carry on, and that we won't want to be buying them all new, kind of as you do on some of the Nintendo's consoles.
Well, one of the biggest things is consumer respect. Like if you've built a big library of titles over the years, and we're talking 20 plus years at this point, then they should do something that honors that. If you have a big library of games that you used to be able to put into older systems, I mean, I guess they haven't done on disc backwards compatibility since the early versions of the PS3 because they just phased it out. And it seems like something they sort of moved away from. Like Sony were very much, nobody wants to play old games. And then on the Xbox side, as soon as they did backwards compatibility, Black Ops 2 was back in the charts again, and it kind of proved like there is a financial reality to making things accessible, older games accessible again. But I guess if you were Mr. Cold Hard Businessman and you were really crunching the figures, is it worth the amount of time the R&D side to put a piece of hardware into the new system that would play everything from the disc? Or you just offload all those games, all those game files to a big cloud hub and just stream them in Google Stadia style, I guess.
Yeah, it feels like that is kind of like the easier answer, especially for Sony. We've talked about this before when we've kind of like covered the importance of backwards compatibility. And at a certain point, it kind of feels like all Sony needs to do is kind of like tick a box so they can say on the marketing that they have backwards compatibility. You can play a PlayStation 1 games, 2 games, 3 games, 4 games on the new machine. And a kind of probably, like you said, a less R&D intensive way of doing that is to kind of just bundle them all into the cloud, say, this is how you do it. Enjoy it. And as long as the service is fine, I'm actually okay with that. It's kind of how they've approached it with PlayStation Now. And yes, PlayStation Now was kind of a garbage fire at the start of the generation.
That's what I was going to ask,
kind of when it was implemented. But they have made great strides over the past few years of reshaping that service and making it way more reliable and giving you way more value for money. Like, that's very much so a response to Xbox's Game Pass, which is, for me, is still kind of like the peak of how you do a subscription-based, legacy-based kind of service while keeping it modern with new AAA releases. And I do think that Sony's obviously been very aware of that, and they have kind of morphed their business strategy over the past few years to kind of directly combat it. And I think if they manage to kind of continue to grow what PlayStation Now is, and then implement this kind of legacy content in a robust way that, like I said, kind of respects the people who already own these games, and it is genuine kind of like backwards compatibility and not just here's a bunch of old games re-released that you can buy or stream or rent or whatever. And I think it would be kind of like huge, because we've always talked about like just how good the back catalogue of Sony especially is, and the fact that you get to play kind of all of these games from PS1 especially. Like that's the big win for me, because we've played a lot of the PlayStation 2 games before. We played Vice City and San Andreas to death, but to be able to go back and play the older titles that we haven't seen in a long time, like Metal Gear Solid 1, for instance. Carmageddon, other games. For me, that would be a win, and it would be an extra thing to play at launch, hopefully, when you don't have that many launch games for the new system, usually.
It sounds like if they do it the way that we're assuming, it'll be a hybrid of they take both the competitions elements. Like on the Nintendo Switch, if you get the Switch Online Pass, so you can have the monthly, you pay monthly, but you have access to the old NES and SNES games, and they still come as a downloadable app. You're not streaming anything in. On Game Pass, it started as some streaming, and then you could download everything. That was also the case with PlayStation Now. So I guess it's like they try and hybridize the two. Like, Sony bought all the Gaikai tech, they bought all the streaming stuff years ago that they didn't really capitalize on. Like PlayStation Now started streaming and then would let you download stuff later, and I guess that's kind of a hybrid of the two. And then they can they can put on the marketing, hey, you can play all generations of PlayStation on the PS5, and as a sentence that's true, and then it's just kind of down to the individual streaming of the game. But that's the thing. I would assume that PS1 and PS2 games will be easier to stream than PS3, just because of the file size and the amount of things that are being rendered or sort of accessed or whatever. But over the years, you've gone back to PlayStation Now way more than me. Like, does it seem like a reliable service now?
It depends. It's more reliable now than it was when I first got it, but that's also because I've got a more reliable internet connection in general now than I first had when I tried it. And I do think, as a general rule, what you just said there, when you go back to kind of less intensive games like PlayStation 2 games especially, they run much better than the kind of more demanding games. Like, for instance, Red Dead Redemption 2 ran like absolute arse, but the Metal Gear Solid remastered collection ran pretty smooth. It ran well. It was fine to play. Oh, sorry, Red Dead Redemption 1.
Right.
That ran like arse. Like, it was just was not good, and I ended up having to get it backwards compatible on Game Pass, funnily enough, because that was the way better version. So there's still a long way to go for Sony to make it as reliable as a Game Pass, or as strong as a virtual console or something. But I do wonder whether they're going to kind of, if they do go down this route, whether they're going to kind of lump all of these games into a subscription and say, here, pay X amount a month and you get access to them all, or whether it's going to be a case-by-case thing of, okay, you can give us a $5 to replay, Bugs and Taz. What was it? Time Twisters or something?
Time Busters, my friend. 10 out of 10 premium 5-star game. If they want to be really greedy, they would split it by generation and just have your PS1 pass, your PS2 pass, and do all that stuff, and then have like the top tier one to access everything, because loads of teenagers weren't even on the planet back when the PS1 was doing the rounds, and they're not going to care about like the Soul Reavers of this world. But like, I don't know, I would just think that assumedly they want to keep in people's good graces. Like, Sony have a tendency when they're out in front to start taking the P, and I think that this would be one of the ways to do it. If they really over monetize their own legacy, it would kind of spit in the face of people who have been there for years, people who are actively wanting to give them, I don't know, £7, £8, £10 a month or whatever to access an entire catalogue of hundreds of titles. Even then, it's going to come down to which games they handpick to put on there, and all the different publisher deals they'll have to do, because all those publishers will have to agree to either not sell remasters or only do it through PlayStation Now, which is, the EAs, the Activisions, the 2Ks of the world are going to like fight back against that.
Yeah, it is. It is funny. Like for me, kind of in general, I can see them lumping it into PlayStation Now and perhaps increasing the cost, or like you say, introducing a few more tiers of kind of price depending on what you want. And I do think that would kind of be a way to not only say, look, we've got all of these backwards compatible games, but also kind of like boost the appeal of that service in general. And also when you're talking about, whether this will impact if publishers, put out remasters because you have all of these games available, I'm not sure that's necessarily true, but I just feel like it'll make those remasters more substantial. I feel like we're already kind of seeing that now. Like the idea of old Call of Duty games coming to backwards compatibility on the Xbox, for instance, hasn't necessarily kind of reduced Activision's interest in making remasters of Modern Warfare or, the Modern Warfare 2 remaster campaign and stuff. I just feel and I hope that easy access to this back catalogue will make these publishers more kind of interested in giving us more of a remaster, something more like Crash Insane Trilogy or Spyro or Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3, put in a lot more work. And hopefully this will mean that they can't just get away with putting out a port of Prototype or Marvel Ultimate Alliance and charging you a ridiculous price for a game that you've already played and that they've essentially put the bare minimum amount of effort into making, or Mafia 2, and they're actually making the experience worse, you know what I mean? If you already have access to those games in these services, they can't get away with that stuff quite as easily.
Well, and case in point was the Modern Warfare 2 remaster from this year, like where it was just, here's the old game, but we've actually stripped out the Spec Ops mode and the multiplayer, and it's just the story mode, but it is how it was before. I guess they touched up the graphics, but like it stood in stark contrast to something like the Crash Insane Trilogy or Crash Team Racing that's been completely overhauled for like a modern audience. Yeah, hopefully it would put them right. I just, cynical me, cynical buzzcut military me thinks that they would just put the same thing out and just charge for it. I mean, maybe they'd double dip and put it on the streaming service as well. I don't know, I would hope that they go down the route of the remakes that we've seen and make those purchases worthwhile separately to the one that you can access elsewhere. But yeah, let us know what you think down in the comments below. Is this a big old blow? Like if this is true and they're going to go down the streaming route, would you rather they did physical media instead? Or just how do you see Sony monetizing their own legacy? Do you think they'll go too far based on the history of it so far? But for now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
I will catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.